channel. I'm Rachel, the owner and creator here at the Eclectic Cottage in Spokane, Washington. For today's video, I have, you guessed it, another thrift flip. I grabbed a couple more of the bulkier items out of my kitchen and gave them each a makeover for today's video. I really love how both of them came out. I hope you guys do too. And without further ado, let's get to today's projects. My first project is this antique footstool that I've had sitting around underneath my craft table for some time now. My kitty thought that this was her personal bed, and so it's pretty dirty and covered with cat hair. And so the very first thing I wanted to do was get rid of the old needlepoint that was on it. So of course that meant going through with my flathead screwdriver and loosening up all those staples, and then carefully pulling back that fabric and then removing some of them with my wire cutters, and then getting that fabric off of it. And I set the top aside for the time being and moved on to the little frame of this. Now, over time, some of the little nails in it had kind of backed off a little bit and the joints weren't exactly super tight. So I used some wood glue in all of the joints and then tapped those nails back in and wiped off the excess glue just to get it all ready for paint. Now I had this fabric and I really loved the blue color that was in it, but nothing from DIY exactly matched it. So I ended up mixing my own color. This is a mix of Farm Fresh, white Swan, and a beautiful blue called Petal Pusher. And I just kept adding little bits of paint until I came up with a good ratio. And then I made just enough to cover this with 2 coats of paint. So the one thing I could say is that I know DIY paints are really easy to blend and mix, which is awesome, but just make sure you make enough that you can cover whatever your piece is with your paint. Now, once that was done and I had 2 coats of paint, and thankfully I did make enough, I let it dry and then I went back in with my damp shop towel and did some distressing. I really wanted some of that beautiful wood tone to show through this paint and to really look more aged and antiqued, since this is an antique. Once I was finished with that, it was time to seal my paint, and for that I chose wax. So I went over the entire piece with 1 coat of DIY's clear wax first, just carefully, gently wiping back the excess with a dry shop towel, making sure you just don't want to rub too hard. You don't want to rub your paint off of your piece. Went over top and bottom, just making sure to get all of the paint sealed. And once I was done with the clear wax, I went ahead and moved on to dark wax. Now, if you've been following me for a bit, you know that I like to keep mineral spirits on hand when I'm using the darker waxes. And I did thin my dark wax with just a little bit of mineral spirits to make it move around just a little bit easier and not be too thick or gunky when I applied it to this piece. I really just wanted to give this a little bit more patina and just darken that color a little bit. And so that's basically why I went ahead and used the dark wax. I also like the fact that it kind of lays in some of the cracks and crevices and just gives them a little bit more highlight and low light, and really pops out some of that detail a little bit better. Once I was done with that, then I was finally able to set the base of this little stool aside and go back to concentrating on the top. So I grabbed my fabric and laid my topper down and made sure that the picture on the front was exactly where I wanted it first before I got started too far. And then I cut out the little piece that I needed with, of course, my handy dandy fabric scissors, and then I began to upholster the top. So I folded under the fabric just because this does tend to fray a little bit and I didn't want frayed edges around the piece of wood. So I just folded it over and then began stapling it down with my staple gun. Went around, and I usually will do 2 sides straight across from each other so that I can pull the fabric nice and tight, and then I do the opposite ends. Once I'm done with that, I just kind of pinch my fabric right at the corner, pull it nice and tight, and then throw a few staples in that little fold. And then I went and grabbed my scissors and cut off that little tail so that it wasn't sticking out everywhere. And then used one more staple to really staple that corner down so it was nice and tight. Then I just went around to the other three corners and did the exact same thing, just making sure I had nice tight corners so that there weren't any wrinkles on the front of this. Now, for some reason, the screws that are supposed to be in this to hold the top onto the base didn't come with it. So I found a couple from my stash and went ahead and attached the top to the base. And then as a last step, I needed to clean up that wood. It was pretty mangled. So I tried painting it. It really still didn't look great. So I found a piece of cardstock that matched a color in the fabric, and I cut a piece out to size so that it would just fit under the lips of the fabric all the way around. And then I used some Gorilla Spray adhesive to attach that to that wood and just kind of tuck it in there, and then pushed it down with my hands to make sure it was well adhered. This cleaned up the bottom of this perfectly, and now it's done, and I absolutely love the result. Project 2 is this vintage sewing box that I've had sitting in my stash for a while. Now, when I got this, several people told me that I should just leave it as is. But you guys, this thing was so dingy and dirty. The inside of it looked like somebody had kept tools in it and they'd scratched the inside pretty badly. The flowers were just kind of dingy and old. It really just needed a refresh. So I decided to go ahead and paint this thing. The very first thing I needed to do was go out and get frostbite in all my fingers and sand the flowers off. They were kind of raised off of the paint, and I really didn't want their shadows showing through when I was done painting. Then I brought it inside, warmed up my fingers just a little bit, and began cleaning this thing. It was pretty darn filthy. There was some kind of a film all over the entire thing, so it really took a good scrubbing to get it ready for paint. I used Crud Cutter the first go round, wiped it down really well, and then I always like to go back with some clean water after the Crud Cutter just to make sure there's no residue or anything sticky or tacky left behind. Once I got that done and it was nice and clean and dry, I went ahead and removed the little lids off of the top, cleaned up the little lip again, made sure everything was nice and dry, and then I began painting. Now, Mother Nature kind of ruined my plans a little bit with this because I am going to paint this, as you can see here. I'm using DIY's White Swan, which you guys have not seen me use white in quite some time. It's not normally a color that I paint a lot of things with. But for some reason, I just thought white was the color I needed to use on this little piece. And my original plan was to take it outside and give it a base coat of white spray paint to make myself or my life a little easier, and I wouldn't have to paint so many coats of the white over. Unfortunately for me, however, it was pouring down rain all day, so I got to brush all of my paint on. Now, I do have to say, DIY paint is very highly pigmented, and honestly, I probably could have gotten away with just 2 coats of paint and hit a couple areas with a 3rd coat if I needed it. However, since I knew I was going to go over this with some 220 grit sandpaper, because if you've been following me for a while, you know I really am not a fan of brushstroke marks. I wanted to make sure that I had plenty of paint on my piece before I sanded it. So I went ahead and gave this 3 good coats of DIY's White Swan before I went over it with some 220 grit sandpaper. Now I did go around the edges and do a little bit of distressing. I really, really love the contrast that those little dark spots give, especially against the white, because all that white makes everything just kind of blend together. And the little bit of distressing definitely helped mitigate that problem. Also, I love the fact that a little bit of the yellow kind of shone through along with some of the wood from underneath, which I thought was just a really pretty color mix. Once I was done giving everything a good sand with some 220 grit sandpaper, I went ahead and I actually washed this thing in my sink. I went over and just rinsed all the standing dust off in the sink, and then just set it aside to dry. Now, I'd already decided I wanted to use this transfer set on this piece before I even painted it. And honestly, it's probably a lot of the reason why I decided to paint this piece white. This transfer is called Trellis Flowers. It's an older one by Redesign with Prima. Again, I've used part of this on another piece. I've had these pieces sitting in my stash for a while, and I'm really, really trying to use up some of the stuff that I have sitting around in my kitchen. I loved the fact that this transfer set had two pieces that were exactly the same, and I felt like they would be perfect on the sides of this little sewing box. So as you saw, I laid this piece down, cut out the base and a little bit of the top just to make it lay down a little easier. And then I used that transfer stick to rub on the transfer as I slowly peeled back the piece of vellum. And once it was down completely, I used the piece of vellum to burnish my transfer in. Did the same exact technique on the other side, laid my transfer down, cut out the base and a little bit of the top, and then again just use that transfer stick to rub the transfer down while I peeled back that piece of vellum. Then I had a couple of pieces that were just flowers, and I put one on the front and one on the back. And again, same procedure, just rubbing them down with that transfer stick, slowly peeling that vellum back until my entire transfer is adhered. Once I had all of my transfers laid down on my piece where I wanted them, it was time to seal my paint. For this, I'm using DIY's Big Top. It's a very versatile, durable sealer. I love it because it's very easy to apply. And for this, I wanted a nice clear coat. I didn't want any other colors. I didn't want to dark wax this. I just really wanted that white to shine through. So I'm just going over this entire piece, including the transfers, with one good coat of Big Top. Now, anytime you apply a transfer, you do want to make sure and seal it, and you can use whatever sealer you're using on the rest of your paint. You don't have to use Big Top to seal a transferred piece. You can absolutely use wax. That works too. Just make sure that you go over the transfer as well. Once I had everything nice and sealed and it was completely dry, I grabbed my screw gun and a handheld screwdriver and went ahead and reattached my little lids for this thing. I was trying to be really careful with the drill because I didn't want to nick my paint, which is why I used the handheld screwdriver at the end. With that, this piece is finally finished, and I absolutely love how it came out. Think of my projects for today. I hope you liked them and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to give it a thumbs up. I so appreciate that. If you haven't already, I would absolutely love it if you would subscribe to my channel and then just hit that little notification bell so you don't miss anything. And don't forget to comment below and let me know which of the two projects from today's video your favorite was. For Friday, I already have some items sitting on my table waiting for me to figure out what to do with them. So it will be another thrift flip, go figure. And as a reminder, I carry the paint and products you saw me use in today's video on my website at www.theeclecticcottagespokane.com. I carry the full line of DIY paint products, Sweet Pickins milk paint, Recycled Treasures decoupage papers, as well as some Redesign with Prima products, in which case they are coming out with some beautiful things soon, and I cannot wait to share them with you, so stay tuned for those. Anyway, I hope you guys have a great week. I hope you'll join me back here on Friday for that video. And until then, thank you so much for being here. I'll see you on Friday. Bye.